Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to talk about living in captivity. So today, for most of us, we are effectively living in captivity. Most of us do not live in the land of Canaan, and otherwise, even apart from that, there is the issue of the Torah not being followed by the society at large. There is not the Torah government in place, that the people are not following it as the law for the entire society, and the people around us oftentimes are not concerned with it either. So effectively, we are living in captivity in a way that we might liken to the Babylonian captivity or the Roman captivity or so forth. And this does have a direct impact on our observance today. For example, if we think about the tent of meeting commands, obviously, we are not able to do them in the absence of the tent of meeting. We're not going to go and perform one of the tent of meeting rituals without it. So obviously, the lack of the tent of meeting has a direct impact on Torah observance today. And we might also think about some of the commands for the society, commands like the cities of asylum and other things like that, that in the absence of the Torah government, in the absence of living in that those commands are not going to be followed in that way that they were intended. And so in thinking about the living in captivity, there definitely is legitimacy in saying that it affects our observance. But there's a distinction that I think we need to make. Because while there are some things we are prevented from doing, such as the tent of meeting issues, there are other things that we are merely inconvenienced with by living in captivity. So one example of this might be issues of clean and unclean and trying to eat what some call kosher. In thinking about how that was probably done amongst a Torah observant community, it definitely would be a different issue than it is today, living in captivity. So if the people in general, they're not having pigs and putting that into their food, they're not going to be using beef tallow and beef blood and putting that into food or anything like that because they're all attempting to observe the Torah, obviously that's going to be different when going and getting food from them as opposed to going and getting food in captivity. Whenever we're doing that today, it's clearly a different situation. And getting it today, we might think, well, how do we know what's in this now? And we might look at that and think, well, is that really what Elohim intended? This inconvenience that we have today in observing that command, is that really what he intended? Because it should be easier than that. And this is true. It should be easier than that. It's not necessarily what Elohim intended. But the thing is that Elohim intended us to follow his commands, to follow his Torah, to live in the land of Canaan, and to live in a Torah observant society. Our ancestors refused to do that, and as a result, we are in captivity today. And so observing certain commands today are going to be more inconvenient than they would have been in that situation. But this is simply a byproduct of living in captivity, living with that punishment. It's not an issue of impossibility. And we might think of something like Exodus 23:13, the mentioning of the names of other Elohim. In much of society today, there is this expectation of doing that at times, especially in regard to something like the days of the week. Some of the days of the week are basically the name of an Elohim, '(s) day. So it'd be like Elohim's day. So in a lot of situations, in business and otherwise, we're expected to say those things. And it's an inconvenience to people, or at least they perceive it that way, if we don't do that, if we seek to not say those names in that way. And so we might look at that and think, well, this is an inconvenience, and it's an issue of living in captivity, because if we weren't, people wouldn't be doing that, hopefully, and so it wouldn't be an issue. So since this is a result of living in captivity, maybe we could perceive it as an impossibility, that we can't get around breaking this command today. So I want to invite us to make a distinction here. With things like the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, we can definitely look at it as we're not in the situation to obey it. But other things like clean and unclean, or things like not mentioning the names of other Elohim, it definitely is more inconvenient doing it in captivity. But is that really the same thing? Isn't that actually different? Because it's an issue of inconvenience, not of impossibility. Now, I don't think that anyone is going to do this intentionally. I think for all of us that are concerned with the Torah, that we are setting our mind to following after the commands as we understand them. But the heart and the mind is kind of an interesting thing. Just as it refers to in Numbers 15, in reference to wearing the tzitzit, it says that we are to have them on our garments so that we see them and we remember all of his commandments, instead of prostituting after our heart and our eyes the things that we are inclined to do. And so we might be inclined to do something, maybe because originally we didn't concern ourselves with the Torah. Originally it was much more convenient doing these other things that we did before, like going to a restaurant and eating whatever we saw fit, or going and just saying whatever we saw fit. It was a lot easier doing that. It was more convenient for us. We might look at a command a different way and try to justify what we want to do and think that it's still in line with the Torah. So we need to be careful of this distinction, because looking toward the ideal, looking toward what was intended, looking toward how obedience is to take place in the Torah society and in the Torah community, that definitely is a relevant issue, and it's something we should strive for. We should strive for the return to the tabernacle and seeking the return of following those commands as well. But living in captivity, we are suffering the punishment of it, that things are not always as easy as they should be. But that does not make them an impossibility. Thanks for watching, and remember the commands. Shalom.